Boerne Radio 103.9 FM. Coming up at 11:30 is The Power of Perseverance with Glenn Boehm. But right now is Ceasefire with Dale Adams and Ron Cisneros. The following is sponsored by the Boerne Bookshop, and this is Boerne Radio.
Welcome to Ceasefire, where civics meets civility and engagement meets empowerment. Ceasefire is hosted by former Boerne ISD trustee and owner of the Boerne Bookshop, Dale Adams, and by former Boerne City Council member and local insurance agent, Ron Cisneros.
Welcome to Ceasefire, brought to you by the Boerne Bookshop. My name is Dale Adams.
And I'm Ron Cisneros.
And welcome. Today we've got Christina Bergmann from Commissioner's Court. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Before we jump in, I'd like to note that this is our 25th episode.
Wow.
Yeah, we hit a silver anniversary here.
That's half a year. That doesn't feel right.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Yeah, and we still have stuff to talk about. That's amazing.
Yeah.
We can do this another 2 years.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, boy. Okay.
No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah.
Christina, thanks for being here.
Yes, again, thanks for having me.
All right. Before we get started, let's talk about you a little bit. You are fifth generation Kendall County?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right. That means your kids are six?
Correct.
That's incredible.
Yes. My Bergmann family, as well as my mother, maiden name Dudley Meckel, has been around this area for quite a long time. Both sides of my parents are founding families of Kendall County.
That's awesome.
That's cool. Yeah.
And you've got a long history here. Besides the family history, you've got a long history of civic engagement, which is one of the things that we like to talk about on the show. And you were, if I recall correctly, Kendall County's first female firefighter.
That is correct. At the age of 16, I joined the Boerne Volunteer Fire Department. I am still currently a member, although I don't do suppression side. I'm mostly on the type of management, attend the board meetings and things like that.
And in addition to that, you've also served on Boerne's Historic Landmark Commission, and you were a city councilwoman for 2 terms?
Yes, sir, that's correct. 2 terms on city council.
And you are now in your 2nd term on the Commissioner's Court.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
That is great. You don't have to call me sir. You've known me a long time. You know better than that.
Ron doesn't need sirs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, Dale is Your Majesty, but for me, it's just Ron.
No.
That's right.
Got it.
No, we don't do any of that. Hey, I had a question. What prompted you to switch over from city to county?
So while I was on city council, I thoroughly enjoyed it over there in city government and learning things. But I started noticing county government and thought that maybe there was something I could bring to the county side of the government. Having served with the city, I thought, okay, I put in my few terms over there, and now I wanted to go serve the county, which I ran my election and won, and that was very exciting. Yeah. And hopefully I have brought some things to the county side and county government that I'll leave behind to help better our community.
Yeah, once in a while I'll hear people talk about how the county government is for the rural people, and I'm like, no, Boerne's in Kendall County, so they should have a bit of a role there somewhere too. So I think it's good to bring some of that experience from one side into the other also. Yeah.
And it also helps with the working relationship with the county and the city. Coming from the city, I was working on some projects over there and had some insight that we were working with the county on as well. So then moving to the county, I had those connections over at the city. So I was able to bridge some gaps of the government workings between the municipality, the city, and the county. And in my opinion, that was very helpful on quite a few things in the beginning of my years to be able to bridge that gap. One of the things that's said quite often is that the cities and the counties don't ever get along. And there are times where we will all disagree on things, but having that relationship to help bridge that gap, I think, between the two entities.
Yeah, I found that when I was on the school board. Whenever the government agencies can work together, you can get a lot done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the goal's the same, is to better our community for our citizens. So if we can all work together and bring in other entities, then why not?
Yep.
Christina, what are some of the differences between a city council form of government and a commissioner's court? And if you could elaborate a little more and tell us what a commissioner's court actually does.
Okay. I'm going to start with what a commissioner's court does. And essentially, in a 30,000 foot view is the one biggest thing that a county commissioner's court does is manage the county budget. So we set the budget for the county and all departments. We oversee certain department heads, and then those department heads have their employees. Then the elected officials are their own employee, their own boss, and Commissioner's Court can't govern an elected official. We can ask them nicely and work together with them on things, but essentially they are a standalone department. What we as commissioners do, number one, is set the budget, but we also hold our Commissioner's Court to handle any of the governmental things that need to come forward for approval. One of the biggest things is when someone is wanting to do something with their property and maybe they want a variance from our rules and regulations. For a good example is like a setback. We have front, rear, and side setbacks. And if the property isn't going to work just right for some circumstance of that piece of property, they can come in and say, instead of a 25-foot setback, would y'all be willing to give us a 20-foot setback? So then we take into consideration the whole project, what's going on, and then Commissioner's Court would vote on whether or not to grant that variance that those individuals are requesting. Another big one is if my family owns 40 acres and we want to divide it into 4 10-acre lots, then that would come in front of Commissioner's Court to make sure that everything's done, it's platted, and all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted with the platting process. So those are the main things that we deal with, other than the day-to-day things, approving the budget, approving the treasurer's reports, and things like that.
I was going to say that the county is like an agent for the state of Texas. So where you don't have a city or city charter to govern you, your role is essentially to represent the interests of the state of Texas in a given area in the county. Is that an accurate or fair description?
It is, and that's where leading into your next question is what's the big difference between a city, municipality, and the county is that the county is governed by the state of Texas, and we uphold the state constitution and the state legislation and laws. Mm-hmm. We handle that, and there are some things that we can be a little more stringent on than the state if the state allows it. But ultimately, our bosses is the state and legislation. Whereas a a city, a municipality can create their own laws. They have the authority to say within our metes and bounds of a city limits, we can enact and say these things, and they are their own government. They don't have to necessarily answer to the state of Texas. But as Dale mentioned before, is the city is within the county. So even the city limits and every city resident is a county resident. So for example, me in Precinct 1, my main focus is the unincorporated area of Kendall County in Precinct 1. But I'm also a representative for the individuals within the city. And that's where, again, a relationship is. I work closely with these council members of the city to say, hey, this is in my precinct and there's this issue. I'm working on a couple of them now where city residents have called me and said, I've got this issue. How do I handle it? I'll call the council member and we'll work together and try and figure it out because we both represent that individual. So again, it comes back to that relationship with the individuals and a group effort. In my opinion, you can get more done than just one person trying to do it.
Yeah. And I think, and tell me if you think this is a fair statement as well, there is considerably less authority or power that you have compared to a council person. And I think there's a misunderstanding of what a county commissioner can and cannot do. What are some of the things that you are not able to do that maybe people think you could do?
And that is a big misconception because everyone's the city does this, but the county, again, through legislation in the state, we don't have that power. One of them is ordinances on certain things, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head, some of them is building code, and we can't regulate necessarily what is on someone's property, whereas the city can say, this is what you can do in this area. The city can implement zoning and say you can only do these things in this area. And a lot of that is like a business district. This is just strictly business. And over here you can do residential. The county doesn't have that power. The county can't say you can't put this in this area. In the unincorporated area of the county, there is really no regulation of what you can do. You can do commercial and residential right up against each other. That is a big misconception because people are like, don't allow that to go over there. We as the county don't have the authority to tell them no because we don't have the authority to do zoning.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people actually seem to complain about things going up that they don't like. A small community that's part of the county could go and incorporate if they decided they did want to control what kind of development went on around them.
That is correct. In fact, a few years ago, it went out to the voters for Comfort to incorporate. And so there are areas with as large and as quickly as Kendall County is growing that there are some things that are needed for those regulations. If they were to incorporate, they would get their own tax base. They could create their own city council. They could create their own police department and governing for that area. So there is that choice, but typically it goes to the voters, and the voters would have to say that. So it's looking at the pros and cons of incorporating, because once you incorporate, all those people within wherever those meets and bounds are set can now be subject to the rules of that municipality. Yeah. And a lot of people, and I run into this too in the county, is we don't want that here, tell them no. And we don't have that capability to be able to do that if those individuals want to go there. So it's scary to say an area is going to incorporate, but sometimes that's the best thing for them.
Yeah, if the people that live there really want to have some control over what goes on there, that's an option.
That is an option, and emergency services is a good example too, because then they have that tax base as their own independent municipality to create an EMS, a fire, a police department, and things like that. Yeah. And then they're not relying on other people to help fund those things.
Yeah.
You were talking about the budget earlier, and one of the primary functions of the Commissioner's Court is managing that budget. The city has several means of generating revenue in addition to property taxes. They're collecting sales tax, they have their impact fees and other fees that they charge. You don't have as much revenue streams as the city.
We do not. And the city of Boerne is unique also because they can use their utility funds for their stuff. But pretty much the way that the county gets its funds is, number one, is through property taxes. And it's our tax base. That is where majority of the income comes from. Now, there are some fees, like if you go and renew your license tags, there's a fee. If you go and ask for a permit, there's a fee. JPs and elected officials can charge fees, sheriff's office. Some of those fees go into our general fund that we can then use. But majority of the funds that we get in order to continue the level of service that we do for our residents comes from from property tax.
Okay. And as you transition from councilwoman to commissioner, what are some of the things that you weren't anticipating that sort of surprised you in that new role?
So it's been a while since that happened, but I would say that the number one thing is what we're talking about is the big difference, going in and realizing, we can't tell people this. We don't have the authority to do that. I would say the number one thing is the difference of the authority that you have in order to regulate things within that unincorporated area.
Yeah. No. And I would imagine too, not from any experience like you have, but I know on the council side, I think my last year there, our budget was $93 million. And it's a lot easier to make a budget when you have $93 million than it is when you have half that, which I think y'all are operating around 50 now or so.
Our overall budget is 90, but because we have 20 million in Prop A funds and things like that, but our general budget is around $50,000-$60,000. So yes, it is a little different.
Thousand or million?
Million.
That's a real struggle.
It's a big struggle. So yes, and one of the things the last 2 years during budget that we've done is we've really tried to curb the spending and say, okay, we've got to look at our wants and our needs, and we can't keep getting wants. We have to do our budget, and then we have to wait for our tax assessor to come forward and say, this is how much we intend you to get in property taxes. So if that number comes low and our budget's high, then we've got a deficit. We can go into our general fund, but the general fund has to stay at a certain amount, and our county auditor is very passionate about making sure that we have enough in there. There's a legal amount that we have to have, but then there's that cushion amount, because if, God forbid, a disaster was to happen and we needed more money for something, we use that general fund. So we don't let it go down too far. So we can't dip into general fund just because we need something, right? Yeah. So it's very interesting that we set our budget, but we've got to wait for that magic number to say, okay, this is going to cover your budget, or you've got a shortfall and then we've got to go back and cut some stuff.
Yeah, I remember we had the same thing at the school board. We waiting to see what happens.
But you've got to do all the work
anyway.
beforehand to make sure that you've got it done, because we can't wait to get those numbers, because the state also says we have to follow this regiment and things have to be voted on by a certain time frame in order to get that budget in place.
Yeah. Okay, this is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back very shortly with Christina Bergmann and talk about County Commissioners Court. Boerne has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Boerne Bookshop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Boerne Bookshop. We pride ourselves on finding what you are looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Boerne Bookshop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Boerne at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Boerne Bookshop. This is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. Welcome back. And we've got Christina Bergmann from Kendall County Commissioners Court. Christina, I had a question about the growth around here, not what most people ask about, but does the role of the Commissioners Court and your role change as we grow? Because as we get bigger and bigger as a county, you guys have more to do in certain areas, and that must affect how you do all of your job.
Yes, it does. So Kendall County as its whole, we've got pockets that are just expanding at the seams, and then in other areas that isn't as popular as other areas of the county. So it grows a little slower, but some of the things that happen is you get development coming in, and back to what we were talking about earlier, there's a limit of what we can and can't tell people to do. So if someone were to come into the county and they meet all of our requirements, they're not asking for variances, and everything is done, then legally as a county, we don't have the basis to say, no, you can't come here. So I've even said it in court and said, I don't like your project. I don't want you here, but I have no legal reason to tell you no. And I've also told my constituents, I can say no, but your tax dollars are going to be used for a lawsuit that we know we can't win. Yeah. So although we don't like the growth, it's coming and our hands are tied to a certain point. But it also brings in more roads, more traffic, more impact. And as Ron said earlier, is the city can do impact fees. The county can't. We can do rough proportionality to say you need to spend this much money on roadways because of what you're doing, and then they can come up with a plan. But we can't get fees to help fix the other roads that are being used to get to that development. So that's with the development side on it, trying to grow is then also we get more people into Kendall County that are coming and using our services. There's more people using our court system, more people using our county clerk office and our tax assessor's office where you go to renew your license plate. So we get more people coming in, and I mentioned it earlier, trying to keep that level of service is the more people that are moving here, the more employees we may need to keep up with the growth that's coming as well, which goes back to the budget process, is we've got to be able to afford to beef up those offices to keep up with the growth.
Yeah. Now, eventually the taxes will catch up, but there's that transition period when you've got the growth and the more people coming in, but the tax revenue hasn't gone up yet.
Correct.
And that's where you get sort of caught in
because
the bind.
if I buy a house in the middle of the year, the tax roll doesn't start till the next year, and then you've got to wait a year to get those funds. So everyone thinks, oh my gosh, the subdivision came in, y'all are getting that much more money, but it takes a while for all that to catch up. Yeah. But as that's catching up, expenses are going up as well. So it's trying to find that balance between your tax income and your expenditures.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears for a second and talk about the makeup of the court. There are 4 commissioners and a county judge. You have staggered terms. And then unlike a council person, which most cities have 2-year terms, you all have 4-year terms. And then your salaried employees of the state versus council people who get a little stipend. If you could go back and talk to Christina Bergmann, the councilwoman running for commissioner, what advice would you give yourself? And then second question here, What would you tell somebody who's interested in running about the differences? Because I think that salary might make people more inclined to run for commissioner versus council person.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think they're fully aware. Because, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of people think, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to shoot down that project. I'm going to become a councilman or a commissioner, and I'm going to not build a road, or I am going to build a road, or I'm going to stop that factory. What advice would you give to a possible candidate that wants to come in and take that seat?
Take the seat as a council member or a commissioner?
As a commissioner.
As a commissioner, I would advise them that make sure you understand the process, because that is said a lot. I'm going to run and I run on this. And you get in there, but you as an individual do not have the power to do that. It's a 5 vote. Unlike city council, the mayor doesn't vote, but the judge does vote on commissioner's court. So it's a 5-person vote. I can sit here all day and say that won't happen on my watch, but if I'm the only one that doesn't vote for it, it's going to happen anyway. Mm-hmm. So people need to remember and do their research of what are you as a commissioner, and it goes back to council as well. What are you legally able to do in order to do what you're saying you're going to run on? And the other thing that I always mention too is people say, why did you do that? And I'm like, because it may not be needed today, but I look at what I call the ripple effect. Whatever I'm going to vote on today is going to make an effect for the next 5, 10, 20 years. So I'm looking out to the future. It may not be something that we necessarily have to do, like you mentioned, a road. It may not be something that we have to do today, but in the next 4 or 5 years, are we going to need to do something? And if you don't start on it now, then in 4 years, when the people go, we need this, it's another 4 years before that ever happens. Yeah. So you can't think of today, and essentially is you need to be more proactive instead of reactive, because government takes a while to get anything done. Yeah. But another point I wanted to make when you were talking about the difference between city and county is on city council, you've got city staff that helps you, and it is just a stipend. And the stipend doesn't cover your gas to go back and forth to meetings, much less anything else. So it is a much smaller fee, but they rely heavily, or at least I did, heavily on staff. Staff is the one that goes out on city and does the research. When the county side is, I'm my only staff. I don't have a secretary. I don't have anyone to help me. There are individuals in the courthouse who will say, hey, if you need me to help you, I'll be more than happy to, but I have to go do the research. I see a project from beginning to end. So it's just me. I have no staff necessarily to help. Other than like a development, I will go in the engineer's office and I will ask questions, and I work very closely with all of our departments on things. But as an individual, I am it. I am my only employee. There is that difference as well, that you don't have as much help from other individuals to do that research for you.
And so the other part of that, as a refresher, my first question is, you can go back in time, or if you could, you're in your 8th year now. What do you tell first year Christina Bergmann, commissioner? Or what do you warn her about?
I warn her about society and how you can be treated, and that you have to have a pretty thick skin to be able to do things. But I would warn her that what you need to do is what you feel is best for your community. And you're not going to make everybody happy, and you have to know that up front. And that sometimes conflict is good, but it's how you handle that. You sit down maturely and have those conversations, and you and I can have a conversation and we can disagree. And once that's over with, we can say, hey, let's go grab a cup of coffee. And that's what I try to do. And I would tell myself, just make sure and remember those things, because it is difficult, and you are scrutinized on everything you do, and you're not going to make everybody happy. Right.
And you were talking earlier about trying to anticipate future needs, or see what's coming down the road, or think about things in the future. And I have a bad habit of touching the third rail in politics, but because you're limited in your ability, in your authority as a commissioner, there are things that are outside your scope, like stopping a development that has access to water. So your county regulations of 1 well for every 10 acres just goes out the window. And there's little you can do if somebody decides to bring in a 500 home development, and you know that's going to bring in traffic. And I think you took a lot of heat, probably unfairly, for a vote. I'm not even going to get into that, but there are things that you have to think about, and road development is one of them. How are you going to move traffic?
Right. And it is, and in fact, side note, when you're talking about our hands are tied, the county has gone to legislation, to Austin, multiple times and said, hey, we need help. Can you change these rules? Can you help us to be able to do better in our community? And we haven't gotten anywhere in the few years that we've gone, but I'll use an example. There's a development that's come up. It touches 3 county roads, and as I mentioned earlier, rough proportionality is they had to do these improvements to those roads, but once those improvements are done, it's turned over to the county, and they're still county roads, and we have to maintain them. And it is the first actual stoplight or traffic signal in the county now that we are responsible for. And so it's now we've got to make sure that we have someone within our road and bridge department or engineers department that can go out and fix those traffic lights if something's wrong. Fortunately, for a year or so, it's under contract for somebody else to do it, but it's forward thinking to make sure that we have a plan for that. Are we going to train somebody to go fix that light? Or are we going to get in a contract with someone that we can call and say, hey, we need you to go out and fix this light? But also in my travels of this new section of roadway is the traffic is really bad on one side because of the light now, and it's backing up traffic. So I'm looking at it going, man, I wish we could have gotten the developer to improve more of that section of roadway, but because our hands are tied and it's rough proportionality, we couldn't make them, right? So I just went in and talked to some of our staff, and I said, what else can we do? So we're going to look at the traffic light and see if we can change the signals to help alleviate that problem. But it's thinking forward to go, okay, we need this more, which I did fight with that developer. I said, can you fix this entire section? And it's, nope, this is how much money we have to spend. You all figure out how you want it done. So it again, our hands are tied to say, you're the one doing this, and we're left with fixing the problem after you're done.
Yeah. Okay, Christina, so last week we talked about the separation of powers, the 3 branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial. And as we had our discussion, we talked about our different roles, and Ron talked about the city with the council and the city and their municipal courts. And as I was talking about the school district, I realized the school district, the judicial is built into the executive. And so there isn't that much of a separation. And I want to ask at the county level about the separation of powers. Now, you've got the county court, which is separate, but are the legislative operations and the executive operations, is there any separation going on there?
Off the top of my head, I say, no, it's all mingled together. Yeah. Where there is a separation is because we have the district court. So you've got your county government, which also holds the district court, which is Judge Cahoon, and she has her own court, right? But everyone there is an employee of the county other than the judge. So you have that little bit of a separation. Yeah. But other than that, I think pretty much it all meshes together. Yeah,
and I've been thinking about that, especially like after we talked about the school district. How can you bring in some separation? Because it's good to have the separation of the 3 different powers. But I hadn't really come up with any solutions, but it just gave me something to think about.
It is a good thing to think about, and I'll be pondering that for a little while after this to think, how could this be done? Because there are a lot of different levels, and I would say the judge has different levels versus the commissioners because the judge is also the probate. So he does probates for individuals. And now this is where it mingles again. If there's something that he doesn't feel comfortable doing, he can send it to the district court judge. So that's where it comes back together too, because he's got that separation that he has the power to do. Yeah. But the commissioner's court has nothing to do with that. So he's got that commissioner's court, and then you've got the district court. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you for listening to Ceasefire. Thank you, Christina, for coming in. If anybody has missed any of our shows, you can listen to the podcast on BoerneRadio.com.
And don't forget your book recommendation.
And my book, today's book, is a little more generic. It's the politics book. It's a DK book. We have it at the Boerne Bookshop, and it's just a summation of all types of political topics. So if you're just looking for something that's not real deep, but covers a lot of territory in the world of politics, it's a pretty neat book. It's got a lot of visuals and charts and biographies and stuff like that. It's pretty neat. So thank you, and we'll see you next week. Boerne has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Boerne Bookshop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Boerne Bookshop. We pride ourselves on finding what you're looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Boerne Bookshop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Boerne at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Boerne Bookshop.